To digest that, he said he was the younger and he appreciated the others. Anyway, so, I'm still a young kid. Okay, this talk is, well, okay, yeah.
You like mics.
Just paint a little face on here. See, now you got me all. This is a little different or unique talk because there's a number of verses in the Bible that I was curious about and had questions, and I thought it'd be a good talk to dive into it. And it was amazing when the Lord works with you. So once I had settled on what I'm going to talk about, I had maybe 4 scriptures and, a little 10-minute talk. And then every day that Ruth and I read the Bible, I got to use that scripture. Whether it was the Old Testament or New Testament, wherever it was, that's one for my talk. Yeah, I got to use that. So now I got 153 verses, and I don't know how long. But anyway, it feels good to kind of know that the Lord is helping you bring these things out. So let's begin. So if today somebody were to offer you $200, or they said, in 8 years I'll give you $800, which would you take? Or if they were willing to buy you a car today, but in 8 years a much better car, what would you do? Well, I think most of us kind of would take the here and now. Right? You young'uns back there? You want it now? Okay. Yes, we tend to want the here and now. And that's why it's so critical what Paul has told us as he directs us away from the now to consider the eternal. So we'll start out with Romans 8:6, and you have a Romans 8:6. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Now, carnal mind is the flesh, the senses, and with its sinful pursuits. In the garden, if you'll recall, Adam walked with God. Everything was fine. There was a connection, and it was faith. God said something, and like a child, he just said, that's fine with me. If God were to say, jump off the cliff, he would say, fine, no problem. He had faith in his loving Father. Once sin came in and broke or severed that spirit, now faith was going away, and now we use our senses to live. What we see, what we hear, what we feel, touch, our appetites, that's how we're living. And we're getting away from faith, and we're going more towards fear and our senses. And that's what Paul is saying. This carnally minded is death. If you just look at the senses. And he wants us to live by faith. In 2 Corinthians 4:18, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. That's what we have to shift our minds towards. Colossians 3:2 in the contemporary English. Think about what's up there, not about what's here on earth. That's what God is directing us. But we, with all our senses, we want to touch it, we want to feel it. It's the here and now. The Aramaic says, feed on that which is above, not which is here on earth. And in the King James, instead of think or feed, it says set your mind. Set it on. There's not necessarily anything wrong with these other things, but we don't want to set our mind on it. Philippians 3:17. Now, if you are in the company that this is where my mind is set on these earthly things, well, you're in the wrong company, because in Philippians 3:17 to 20, Paul is talking about the false teachers. And he says, for many walk, of whom I have often told you, and now tell you even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their appetite, and whose glory is in their shame, who set their minds on earthly things. So we don't want to be following these false teachers, emulating. Is that a good word? We don't want to emulate the false teachers. We don't want to set our minds on temporary things. We want to set our minds on above. And then in verse 20 it says, for our citizenship is in heaven. 1 Peter 4:2. Consequently, he does not live out his remaining time on earth for human passions, appetites, desires, that's the flesh, but for the will of God. That's the way it should be. Now, two other verses that came to mind. These verses are not directly about the eternal, the temporary, but as you know, the Bible has different layers, and this just kind of clicked to me when I was reading it. Mark 13:1 and 2. Now Jesus and his disciples are leaving Jerusalem. And Jesus was leaving the temple. One of his disciples said to him, Teacher, look at these magnificent stones and buildings. Do you see all these great buildings? He was looking, that temple was magnificent. You know, they didn't have any cranes or they didn't have any modern day. It was just slave labor. Wonderful craftsmen. This was a beauty to behold. But notice Jesus. He says, do you see all these great buildings? Yeah, okay. Then Jesus replied, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. And he's talking about in 70 AD when the Roman army comes in and demolishes it. So the point here that I saw was that the disciples are looking with their eyes, with their senses, and they see this beauty. And Jesus has to pull them back a little and says, yeah, it's beautiful, but it's going to be gone. It's going to be gone in 40 years. So don't put your heart there. It's nice, look at it. Don't put your heart there. It will be gone. And also, when Jesus is before Pilate, and all these accusations, serious stuff, and Pilate says, do you answer nothing? See how many things they testify against you? But Jesus still answered nothing, so that Pilate marveled. Pilate definitely had his mind set on the earth and all these things that are going on. He says, they're going to crucify you. Say something. You're innocent. Do something. But Jesus had his eyes on heaven, the eternal. It just doesn't matter here. Not to belittle the cross and all he went through, but compared to heaven, this is nothing. I see my Father. And you know that song that says, I didn't want heaven without them. Them is us. And so Jesus is looking in the future to heaven with the Father and with us. All this stuff here, this ain't it. That should be our mindset. Okay. As we go about life, don't concentrate on the earthly, the fleshly, that which is of the senses. But think, concentrate, incline towards the things of God. A great example of this, which we will use, is Moses. Hebrews 11:24-29. And so I can get a rest here, because I know I'll be talking for hours and hours. So Ruth will read 11:24-29.
By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover, the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them.
Thank you.
Don't you want me to read 29?
No. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you meant 27.
Yes, she knows. I knew I'd have trouble with her, but anyway. So, Moses was a young man when he came to the Crossroads. On one hand, because he was the son of Pharaoh, he had the riches of the world at his fingertips. That's, of course, the flesh, the temporal. He had anything. He had power, or he would have if he would stick around. He had it all. Now, there's more ladies in here, so my example maybe won't go over as big. But, here's this young kid. He's in the palace. All the people are out there working for him, growing his food, raising his sheep, and building buildings for him. And he's sitting there in the cool of the palace. And these ladies, are fanning him with those big fan palms. And they're peeling his grapes. I mean, he had it all. So, the other road, of course, would lead to suffering and affliction. What would he choose? Well, take the riches, of course. I mean, why go over to Goshen and work in the brickyards? You got a beautiful palace. It's kind of a no-brainer. But that's because we're looking, like most people, at the temporary. And we're looking at the here and now. We're not factoring in the eternal. But the neat part is that Moses knew God. Moses had a revelation of the coming Messiah, as did Abraham, and he chose the eternal. Now, it's very interesting what Ruth read. It talks about the reproach of Christ. How did Moses compare? How did he know about the reproach of Christ? Well, as I said, he did have a revelation of the coming Messiah. The reproach is to be despised, reviled, criticized, accused, which Christ was. He was all of those things. But Jesus, when he was here, again, he had his eyes upon heaven, upon the eternal. And it didn't matter what they did to him here. He wanted heaven and he wanted his church, and he looked to the eternal. Now, Moses is a type of Christ. He did the same thing. He had the pleasures over there, just like Satan gave or attempted to give Jesus the kingdoms, and Jesus said no. And so Moses, he had a kingdom, the Egyptian kingdom. But he did have some type of revelation that the Messiah is coming, his Savior. And he says, I don't care how much gold or silver or how many peeled grapes there are here. I want the Messiah, eternity, to be with the Messiah. And that's what he held on to. And that's why he walked away from the palace into the brickyards and all the accusations and reviling and the criticisms that he got. But that was just a short time. And we have the same choice. We can choose the worldly, the earthly, the temporal. We could eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, grab for all the gusto. Or we can choose the eternal, the spiritual, the holy. It's our choice. The crossroads that Moses came to is the same crossroads that each one of us comes to. And Moses turned from the temporary to the eternal. He fixed his eyes on eternity. Now, let's pause a minute and think, okay, well, I mean, I might live 80 years and I might be a rich king. I'm giving up a lot. What's this eternity? So, eternity, in comparison, would be the thickness. That's your life, the thickness of this paper. That's your life. Eternity would be from here to the other side of the room, out the door, up the hill, over to Kona, over to California, New York, and beyond. So you're worried about this when you got all eternity. Don't give up eternity for this. Not worth it. When I was a kid, they used to have drag races on the streets. And so here were mainly high school kids. I think the drag race was, 10 seconds, 15. And these kids were willing to risk that 10 to 15 seconds for the thrill of the drag race. And sometimes it didn't end very well. They might get into an accident, they might die, they may be crippled, but they risked that 10 seconds for the rest of their life. But that's what people do. It's sad. We have a choice. If we choose God, we may experience a short time of possible tribulation, but then eternal glory. Or we may choose to